As the year draws to a cold and icy close, many ordinary people in Britain will be unable to afford to keep their homes warm. Yet even in this bleak midwinter, Britain's Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority, IPSA for short, has confirmed its proposal of an 11% pay increase for members of Parliament, and its decisions are binding. A private debate rages in Parliament itself, with 2/3 of MPs quietly supporting the case for an increase. So, while millions of British citizens are still struggling to live on their incomes, the politicians are presented with an unpopular rise which many would like to take but few dare to support publicly. How could this have happened? Even leaving aside the pros and cons of an increase, the public relations damage, thanks to a process the MPs themselves set up, has been immense. But how exactly do citizens feel about the situation? Do they feel MPs are in touch with public opinion? Are they seen as worth the increase? These are the simple questions we were determined to answer. We began by asking the public what financial problems are people in Britain experiencing today. So what financial problems are people in Britain experiencing today?
I'd say the main thing is just having enough disposable income. People's wages, their salaries don't seem to be increasing in general with inflation. MPs, politicians have been given a generous 11% rise, way above and beyond inflation. Not that they shouldn't be paid well, because I mean, if you pay the politicians badly, of course, then there could be an inherent conflict of interest. You know, they could be susceptible to embezzlement, bribery, that sort of thing. But yeah, in general, people don't seem to have as much money as they used to, and rental, for example, has gone up enormously. Rental and just the things you need to live, basically.
Surviving day to day, week to week. In particular, I think in addition to the financial issues that individuals are facing, there's the threat of redundancy. I've just been with an organisation this morning, a voluntary organisation, thought they'd be part of the big society and they've been forced to close. It's just, so that's other staff who, part-time, full-time, who are putting in more hours than they're being paid for anyway, now within weeks going to be out of work. So people in jobs are doing the work of 2 or 3 people and feeling exhausted. Others are looking for work, not getting it. And then in addition to that, the cost of living is rising, and people are struggling just to live the life that they had a couple of years ago.
What financial problems do you think the people in Britain are experiencing today?
Well, what I'm hearing from the media, but not actually seeing, I don't know. I can't actually comment because I personally am not being affected. I work part-time, but I hear through the news that people are having to go to food banks, which I just find so incredible when this country actually gives good benefits. So that's a sort of a sore point with me anyhow, benefit.
Well, quite a range, I imagine. There's a lot of what I keep hearing from friends is credit cards. Have difficulty paying off credit cards, which balances just a maximum, and they can't pay them off. Lots of problems with the rising cost of fuel, gas, electricity. It's a whole range of things. Petrol prices. There's an endless list, really.
So that's what the public said. We wanted to know whether there was an objective summary of the financial challenges facing British people.
I think cost of living, particularly heating, lighting, and also housing, I think those are the main ones, but generally the cost of living is hitting people rather hard.
People in Britain are experiencing huge financial problems. We're seeing pay cut or frozen, people having to do 0-hour contracts, people not being able to get work at all benefits being cut, disabled people being told they have to go to work when they're not fit for work because they've got severe disabilities, young people unable to get a job, and more families, including working families, not just the unemployed, having to go to food banks and turn into payday loans and ending up in spiralling debt. And this is, you know, people having to make real decisions about whether they pay a bill, they pay an energy bill, or they put groceries on the table for their family.
Britain has suffered a deep recession, and many still bear the scars. We were curious to discover how well the public felt the government had handled the people's money during the recession. How well do you think the government's handled the people's money during the recession?
Oh, what money? When I was not working, I was on benefit, and they paid half my rent, and I almost lost my flat over it.
Well, I think that they've allowed the banks to run absolutely wild. This business of giving money abroad, and you know, when it's people who are deserving at home, I don't think there's any need to give all this money away ad lib throughout the world when we need it at home.
How well do you think the government has handled people's money during the recession?
Well, again, they say there are sort of green shoots. It's an uphill battle. I think they're all losers anyhow. I've got no respect, I'm afraid, for any... Anyway, maybe Steve Pound. I know he does things. He's not my MP, but that's all really I can say.
I understand that things are looking up, so hopefully, I mean, I don't really... but I would say probably reasonably well. They seem to have kept an even keel.
I don't think it's good at all, because so much cuts have been made to like schools, like children's educations, and I don't think, like, for the next generation that should really be a cut, or anything cut to do with like putting forward the next generation, to be honest.
We asked our experts whether there was a good comparison of the performance of Britain's politicians compared to other countries.
I don't think they've done it that well. The economy is recovering, it's true, which is good, but I think there are major problems, as I've indicated, around the cost of living, and they really do need to get to grips with the energy crisis for people.
The government haven't cared at all about people's money, because their focus has been on cutting the poorest out of society. The rich are still getting richer, and it's a false economy, because for the economy to recover, what's needed is growth. If you cut people's wages, the fuel prices rise, grocery costs rise, people can't go out and spend. Actually, it doesn't help the economy to recover.
British ministers have suggested police should make thugs go to a cash point to pay £100 on-the-spot fines, even though not everyone has access to £100 or even a bank account. How well, in the eyes of the public, do politicians relate to the ordinary citizen's financial challenges? Ministers have suggested that the police should make thugs go to a cash point to pay £100 on-the-spot fine, even though not everyone's got access to £100 and not even a bank account. How well do you think politicians relate to the people's financial challenges?
They don't relate. They haven't got a clue. I'm having now to think about going to work in Dubai to earn a living. And I've had to do a lot of research on how to live in Dubai. I lived on the Edgware Road, so I kind of know a bit about it, but I'll tell you what, nothing at all. Absolutely, I've felt let down, totally let down.
I think most politicians do. I think we berate politicians. I think they're better than they are generally seen, because I think most people go into politics not for the money. I think most people do go into it from a genuine sense of wanting to make the world better and the country better.
Well, not very well at all, but I mean, really that just seems like a ridiculous idea overall. I mean, you know, a thug, you know, if he's transgressed the law, needs to be held accountable, and you can't just pay a fine for that. I guess depending on the severity of his crime, he needs to, you know, have the appropriate punishment dished out to him.
Ministers have suggested the police should make thugs go to a cash point to take out £100 to pay on-the-spot fines, regardless of the fact that lots of people haven't got £100, let alone even a bank account. How in touch do you think British politicians are with, well, the people's financial challenges?
Totally out of touch, you know, when it comes to comes to things like that. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You know.
Don't think they relate at all, really. It's like I say, there's the real world which we live in, and there's the world the politicians live in, which is just, to me, it's two totally different places.
What do these kinds of policy suggestions tell us about the connection between British politicians and their people? We asked our experts for their view.
I remember Tony's comment on that, and actually at the time an awful lot of people thought it was a very good idea. I mean, in fact it wouldn't have worked for the reason you're giving, but a lot of people wanted something like that done. I think the bigger issue is, are politicians in touch? I think MPs are, because you're always in your constituency, and when I was an MP, you'd get stopped in the street and you'd get people giving you an earwigging and so on. The difference is really governments. Governments, because they're so pressurised by events, do tend to get out of touch at times, and I think this government's in acute danger of that, and if you get out of touch you lose elections.
Generally speaking, British politicians, the vast majority of them, are not in touch with the reality of ordinary people in Britain. People who are struggling to make ends meet, people who are taking out payday loans and ending up in spiralling debt because they don't have enough money coming in just to put food on the table and pay their bills. People who are going to food banks every week, and this isn't just people who are unemployed. There's over 100,000 young people unemployed who can't get work at all because the jobs aren't there. There are people that are doing 0-hour contracts and don't know whether they're going to get enough money from one week to another just to survive. So they have no connection with the reality of the ordinary person, and the reality is that they don't care anyway.
Britain's Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority proposes an 11% increase in salaries for MPs. Do the citizens of Britain feel this is fair? We asked them. The Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority proposes an 11% increase for members of Parliament. Is that fair?
Again, this is... You could argue it either way. You could say it's absolutely not fair given the circumstances of everyone else in the country. But then you've got to think of the other side. If they're not paid enough to carry out their duty, you know, they are running a country, not just any country. This is the United Kingdom. It's not a small country. It's a rich country. It's a first world country. It's a leading country. And I would think somewhere in the line of being around in the same of, you know, typical board members' pay is about right. And again, if you don't pay them enough, they're just going to be open to corruption, embezzlement, that sort of thing.
I understand all the arguments around, you know, wanting good people in politics. People need a standard of living. But someone who's worked in the public and private sector all of my life, don't I deserve a standard of living that's fair too? You know, the person who's running the shops, or, you know, whoever. Don't we all deserve fair remuneration, you know, fair pay? And yeah, all the business about the expenses scandal for MPs now being turned into that's why we should have a fair pay rise. Well, most people I know haven't seen a pay rise in 4 years.
I don't begrudge MPs their money. I don't begrudge MPs their money, to be frank. I think my feeling is they're our servants, and as our servants we have to pay them a reasonable salary. So no, I think 11% is fine.
The Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority proposes an 11% increase in salary for MPs. Is this fair?
Totally not. No, not in comparison to you know, the rest of the working population. You know, seeing their wages capped. You know, redundancies, unemployment. You know, 11% in relation to inflation and everything else, apart from energy prices, of course. It's just not, you know, realistic or fair.
Not really. So what is everyone else meant to survive on? Why can't there be 11% increase on everyone else's money? Why should everyone have to literally just manage to survive, and other people are living a good life and they've got everything they need?
The public generally don't suggest that MPs should work for nothing. However, they clearly feel unhappy about the way in which this pay rise has been handled. What's the professional perspective on this pay rise and how it's been treated?
The independent parliamentary pay body was set up precisely to stop MPs deciding their own salaries, and I think you've got to hold that. It's independent, so the only way you can stop the rise happening is by abolishing the body, in which case MPs go back to setting their own salary, and that's not a good idea. It's a generous amount in pay, but people need to remember it's a package, so MPs are also going to lose their certain pension rights and certain other expenses, and the whole package is cost neutral for the taxpayer, so it's not as bad as it looks at first image.
It's complete outrage that MPs are getting an 11% pay rise at a time when the vast majority of us haven't had a pay rise for 5 or 6 years and not earning enough money just to survive. People having to go to food banks, people having to take out payday loans just to survive. It's disgraceful, and it shouldn't be happening at all.
Let's turn to the actual figures. MPs earn over £65,000 plus expenses, and cabinet ministers earn over £130,000 a year. Do the public feel they deserve it?
MPs earn £65,000 plus expenses, and ministers earn upwards of £130,000 a year. Do you feel they deserve it?
I don't know what they do, so I mean, is that paying for all these idiots in Europe? People like Kinnock, the Champagne communist who said he'd never join, and yet he's got all his family, all their noses are in the trough. So we're paying for these people to do, well, I don't know what they do. I'll be honest, I don't know what they do.
Well, as I say, I don't think it's a particularly attractive job myself, and when you've got people in the city and in other professions earning many times more than that, I don't think it's an unreasonable salary.
Well, if that's a going rate, I suppose they've got to have it, but half the time I don't think they deserve it, but they're getting it, so, you know, what can you do about it?
MPs earn £65,000 a year plus expenses, and ministers earn over £130,000 a year. Do you feel they deserve it?
When you're out on the road selling, and you're getting 30 grand a year, and you don't get home, you can't even put your kids to bed because they've gone to sleep already, and they're getting what? Oh, it's ridiculous. No, I don't agree with it at all. I just think it's a complete facade.
How do these pay scales relate to what MPs are paid in other countries? Are they reasonable? Our experts offered an insightful and reasonable perspective.
MPs work very hard, in my experience. I'm not an MP anymore, but believe me, you work very long hours. The expenses will vary enormously. If you're an MP for Shetland, your expenses are going to be a lot higher than if you're an MP for an inner London constituency, because you won't have the travel problems in inner London. So you have to look at what those expenses are for each individual before you decide. But by and large, MPs actually work incredibly hard, arguably too hard, to the extent that they're not able to give what I call the thinking time to some of the enormous issues that face Britain and the world.
Well, MPs with expenses earn 100,000 plus, when the average wage in Britain is not even a living wage. Average wage in Britain is around £23,000. So you can see there's a huge difference. And actually, a lot of poor working class people are having to do 2 or 3 jobs, do a day shift, then go and do a night shift, and they don't even bring in a tenth of what those MPs are earning. And I think if you're elected as an MP, you're supposed to go into it because you want to provide a public service, you care about the community you live in, and you oughtn't to be doing it to make a profit for yourself.
So, it seems British MPs aren't exceptional in terms of what they earn. But we end where we started, with the process which has caused so much anger amongst the public. After all, they cannot vote on this pay increase. Should they have the right to do so?
The public can't veto pay increases for MPs. Should they have that right?
No, I don't think so. I just don't think it would work.
Why wouldn't it work?
Because I think the majority of the population would be earning far less than that, and for whatever reason, they would just veto it for no good reason.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why is that?
Well, because MPs are the public's representatives. And I think the biggest single, if I could summarise the concern that people have, as I see it, it's that people feel MPs are no longer representatives of them, whichever our political persuasion might be. I think MPs now are seen as a collective, almost a profession and a professional group in its own right. And the more that's built up, the less and less they have to do with the rest of us.
The public can't vote on the decision to change MPs' pay. Do you think you should have that vote?
Yes, I do. It's our money, isn't it? I've been paying taxes all my life. I've never earned that, and I never will earn that sort of money. I'm watching my heating. I'm not buying as many goodies as I used to, I suppose, in Waitrose, but that's all I can say, really.
That's really tough. To a degree, I think. I don't think people, it's right that people be heard. Whether they actually have any kind of active role in deciding that, no, I don't think that would be appropriate, no.
Yeah, because if they say, everyone has their own opinion, that it's an equal world, but it's not really. If it was equal, we'd be able to come to some sort of decision or an agreement on how much we think they should be getting paid.
The new system of setting parliamentary salaries replaced one in which they were voted on by MPs. Given that neither system has stopped public anger, what might have made the whole process less provocative? Our experts offered this perspective.
Well, the public do have the right to challenge a pay rise in as much as they can challenge their individual MPs and not vote for them. But I think what people need to think about this is if you make your MP get rid of the independent body, you then stuck with the position of going back where MPs decide their own salaries again, and I don't think that's a good idea.
I think that the public should be able to challenge the proposed pay rise for MPs because effectively it's our money. The council tax is going up, the price of gas and electricity is going up, the cost of living across the board is going up, yet our wages aren't in line with inflation. So why should MPs get this pay rise and the public can have no say in that money, when that money could be put to good use actually for those people who can't even keep their head above water, who are losing their home, who are struggling just to put food on the table every day.
The pay rise for British MPs comes from a process which has failed to take the controversy from the issue. A mechanism which Parliament itself created is working against the wishes of the public, particularly in this time of austerity. Yet even MPs can do nothing about it. There may be arguments in favour of an increase in MPs' salaries, yet it is clear that the very system they introduced to protect them from setting their own pay has, instead, made the population angry and MPs frustrated. Ironically, party leaders have become so afraid of public anger that, despite their own large salaries of over £130,000 a year, they tell colleagues to reject their own increase. In this case, when it comes to public relations, there are no winners, only degrees of losing.